Madam Deputy Speaker, I fully support banning this march. The police assessment of the risk is right, and in fact I wrote to the Commissioner a week ago urging exactly this ban. But the problems with the Al-Quds march go beyond simply the risk of serious disorder. In 2010, 10 people were arrested for assault of an emergency worker, inciting racial hatred and public order offences. Chants at Al-Quds marches in the past have called for intifada and revolution. Calling for intifada and revolution are calls for violence, and calls for violence have no place on our streets. A leading speaker at these marches has been Nazim Ali, a man who has demanded that Israel, quotes, be wiped off the map. Speaking at a previous march, Ali even blamed what he called Zionists for the Grenfell fire. He also said, and I quote, "We are fed up of Zionists, their rabbis and their synagogues." This reference to rabbis and synagogues shows that when this despicable man says Zionist, he means Jews. This is clear anti-Semitism. So speech inciting violence and speech inciting anti-Semitism, which we have heard at these marches in the past, has serious consequences. Anti-Semitism is now rampant. Jews are 10 times more likely to be victims of hate crimes than Muslims. We saw an Islamist-motivated murder at a synagogue in Manchester just a few months ago. In the past 25 years, 94% of all terror murders in the UK have been committed by Islamist terrorists, who also make up 75% of counter-terrorism caseloads. So does the Home Secretary share my concern that the Prevent caseload is only 10% Islamist in nature? And if she does share my concern, what does she propose to do about that? The organiser of the Al-Quds march is the so-called Islamic Human Rights Commission, which, as the Home Secretary quite rightly acknowledged, is in essence a front organisation for the Iranian regime. Now, former Iranian Deputy Minister of Culture, Ali-Aqsa Ramazanpour, has said that there is a network of Islamic charities in the UK which are, in his words, not autonomous, but are in fact funded and controlled by the regime in Tehran. Does the Home Secretary share my concern about that? And what does she propose to do about it? Of course, in opposition, the Labour Party also, I think rightly, pledged to proscribe the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. Will she update the House on the implementation of that pledge? I'm also deeply concerned about many events that have been recently held, particularly at universities, lamenting the demise of Ayatollah Khamenei, a man who in the last few weeks was directly responsible for the murder of 30,000 of his own people, a man who supported and sponsored terrorism around the world, including backing Hamas and the atrocities on October the 7th, and who backed various regional wars. Will the Home Secretary join me in condemning those who mourned his demise and celebrated his evil acts? More broadly, Madam Deputy Speaker, and finally, the Al-Quds marches are a troubling symptom of a growing division in our society, where some people define themselves primarily by their religion or their ethnic heritage, and we've seen that spilling over into the conduct of elections. This is deeply troubling and deeply divisive. It undermines the very foundations of our nation, which depend on a shared identity and shared values. I'd be interested in the Home Secretary's views on that, and I hope the House returns to that topic. Let me finish with a broader point. Extremism has no place in the UK. Support for terrorism or violence has no place in the UK. Religious and racial hatred, including anti-Semitism, have no place here. So when someone who is not a British citizen expresses extremist, violent, pro-terror or racist views, in my view they should have their visa revoked and be expelled, as set out in Section 3 of the Immigration Act 1971. The Home Office's own guidance makes clear, and I quote, that support for extremism or other unacceptable behaviour meets that statutory test. So will the Home Secretary use those powers to expel extremists who are not British citizens?
Home Secretary. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Shadow Home Secretary for his comments and his questions. Let me just say to him, firstly, he began his remarks by talking about some of the unacceptable acts of violence and incitement to violence that have taken place at various marches, not just relating to Al-Quds Day, but it is not unusual for multiple arrests to be made at all the different types of protest marches that take place. I hope he will join me in supporting the police as they ensure that the full force of the law is applied at all times, in all circumstances. And of course, I have recognised that there are some complexities in the legal framework and an inconsistency of application, and that is why I've asked Lord Ken MacDonald to do his review so that we do have much more consistency of practice across the UK and clarity for the police about what they can and cannot do when it comes to some of the things that are said when protests take place. And I hope that we can continue to work together across this House on those matters. He asks a specific question in relation to Prevent. Let me tell him that, of course, I keep under review the way in which the Prevent programme is functioning. There have been a number of recommendations made, multiple recommendations over many years, with many reports into the functioning of Prevent, and it is important that Prevent referrals are made in line with the statutory requirements and with the guidance, and that they are picking up those that we want to take away from a mindset and an ideology that could ultimately result in harm. So, I don't think it's appropriate for us to set percentage requirements of what should happen in terms of referrals, but it is absolutely important that the right referrals are being made, and we always work with partners who deliver the Prevent programme and with local authorities and others in making sure that is done properly. Let me say to him on the Islamic Human Rights Commission that the trust that is responsible for that charity is currently subject to a statutory inquiry by the Charity Commission, so I think it's important that that work is allowed to continue, and of course once they have reached a determination, I'm sure that will be something that will be discussed in the House in the future. On the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, he will know, we have said this before, we've had this discussion many times at this dispatch box, and in fact the answers aren't all that different from when these positions were reversed between our parties. We do not comment on matters relating to proscription, but this government has accepted the recommendations made by Jonathan Hall, Casey, and we will be taking forward that work at the earliest available opportunity. Look, in relation to those who are mourning publicly the death of Khomeini, the deceased leader, supreme leader of Iran, this is where free speech really butts up against what conduct most of us would consider appropriate. Let me say to him, I do not, of course, mourn the passing of Ayatollah Khomeini. It is for others to decide what they do and do not support. What I'm absolutely clear on is whatever methods people use to express their political views, they must do so in line with the law of this land, and that law should be always enforced without fear or favour. And I will always support the police in making sure that that is the case. And then separately, he also asks about how we work as a society. I think his questions are about what the responsibilities are of citizens in this country. I don't think it's for a government to dictate to its citizens what political views they're allowed to hold or how they should express themselves or their identity, whether that is religious or ethnic or something else in nature. It is the job of government to make sure that we have a set of rules and a set of values that are equally applied, our respect for democracy, our respect for the rule of law, and all of the norms by which our society operates. That does mean that we do accept free speech and people's ability to have views that might be offensive, that many of us might disagree with, but they are still allowed to express those views. And I wouldn't want to see anything that happens in relation to these very troubling events to then clamp down on those freedoms that we hold so precious. It is always a judgment and it's always a balance that has to be struck, and it's important that the government always tries to strike that balance in the right way. And then on his final point, this government has already taken action, and I will always use my full powers under the law to make sure that those who would cause harm in our country with their extremist views are not allowed to enter our country, and I won't hesitate to use my powers under any of the immigration acts to exclude people from this country who have no right to be here.